While all the attention of the world community is focused on Ukraine and the future negotiations between the United States and Russia, no less dramatic events are unfolding in the Baltic region. Many experts and analysts have already stated that the events occurring in the Baltic region, particularly in the Baltic Sea, could lead to an outbreak of a global war, on a scale that humanity has never witnessed before. As you may recall, over the past 3 months, the NATO countries of the Baltic region have begun to regularly report damage to communication and power cables running along the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Moreover, the leadership of the North Atlantic Alliance called what is happening in the Baltic Sea a real sabotage, and accused Russia of this. The most interesting thing is that all these accusations against Russia had no evidentiary basis, and were literally sucked from a thumb. However, this did not prevent the NATO countries from attacking Russian ships in the Baltic Sea. In particular, on December 25, 2024, in the Baltic Sea, NATO special forces attacked and seized the Russian oil tanker Eagle S. Later, the Finnish authorities stated that this Russian vessel was detained due to suspicion of damage to the power cable East Link 2. According to the Finnish authorities, this Russian vessel allegedly damaged an underwater cable using an anchor. However, Finland later admitted that the NATO countries have no evidence that it was the Russian oil tanker Eagle S that caused the damage to the underwater power cable. A month earlier, at the end of November 2024, 2 more cables were damaged at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. These were BCS East-West Interlink and Sea Lion 1 communication cables. These cables connected countries such as Germany, Finland, Sweden, and Lithuania. Back then, the NATO countries once again blamed Russia for what happened, and called on the North Atlantic Alliance's leadership to strengthen the Baltic Sea security. Against this backdrop, from January 2025, NATO warships began patrolling the Baltic Sea. This operation was called the Baltic Sentry. It is expected that in the coming weeks, NATO's military presence in the Baltic Sea will significantly increase with additional warships from Germany, France, Norwegia, Latvia, and Finland. In fact, the main purpose of this operation is to organize a blockade of the Gulf of Finland and prevent Russian ships from entering the Baltic Sea. Commenting on this situation, Russian presidential aide, Nikolai Patrushev, called NATO's actions terrorist, and that Russia would have to use military force to solve this issue. In its quest to weaken Russia, NATO is increasingly using terrorist methods. These terrorist methods are manifested not only in Ukraine, but also in the Baltic region. NATO's actions are not only destroying the global maritime trade system, but also negatively affecting the overall safety of cargo and passenger transportation. Russia will never turn a blind eye to this, Nikolai Patrushev said. Furthermore, an influential Russian politician and member of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Jabarov, bluntly stated that Russia will have to destroy NATO, due to the alliance's efforts to isolate Russia and close access to the Baltic Sea for the Russian ships. According to him, the NATO countries, with the help of provocations with underwater cables, created an artificial reason to start patrolling the Baltic Sea, in order to block Russian ports and ships. Vladimir Jabarov reminded the NATO countries that in the 18th century, Emperor Peter the Great cut a window through Europe, providing Russia with an outlet to the Baltic Sea, after which Russia turned into a great maritime power. And this fact was very annoying to the West. Since the 18th century, the West has constantly tried to block Russia in the Gulf of Finland, doing everything possible to prevent Russian ships from entering the Baltic Seas. Consequently, Russia had to confront Western countries and achieve military victories over them, to safeguard its national interests. Vladimir Jabarov expressed confidence that if NATO continues to provoke Russia in the Baltic region, Moscow will once again have to use its military force to cool the hotheads in the West. At the same time, he stressed that Russia has all the necessary military capabilities to completely destroy the North Atlantic Alliance. By the way, the accumulation of Russian warships of the Baltic and Northern fleets in the White Sea indicates that Russia is indeed preparing to punish NATO in the Baltic region, using one of its most effective trump cards. Yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that a small missile ship of Project Karakurt successfully fired Caliber cruise missiles in the White Sea. As a result of these firings, coastal targets at the Chiz training ground were destroyed. Well, nothing is surprising in this news for military experts. However, for everyone else, this news caused a lot of questions. Many were surprised by how the warship of the Baltic Fleet ended up in the White Sea, and what this ship was doing in the area of responsibility of the Northern Fleet. To answer these questions, we must look into the past. Namely, what happened 300 years ago. More than 300 years ago, Peter the Great, during the Northern War, faced the unpleasant need to drag 2 frigates along the land from the White Sea to Lake Onega. This need was very expensive, and required a lot of time. As a result, the Russian Emperor put forward the idea of digging a shipping channel, which in the future would facilitate the transportation of ships. This idea was correct and everyone agreed with it. However, neither Peter the Great nor the subsequent rulers of Russia had enough money to implement this idea. Only in 1931, Joseph Stalin, realizing that the idea of Peter the Great can no longer be postponed, began the construction of the White Sea Canal. This ship canal was intended to give additional impetus to the economic development of the Russian North. However, the main purpose of this ship canal was military strategic. Few people remember that in the 20th years of the last century, the so-called Seal War between Norway and the USSR was going on in the White Sea over biological resources. Every spring, under the cover of their navy, hundreds of Norwegian and British trawlers entered Soviet waters and exterminated seals and whales in a barbaric way. The Soviet border guard on small ships could not prevent this. Moreover, Norway defiantly ignored all diplomatic requests from Moscow. The Kremlin understood that something urgently needed to be done about this. The White Sea Canal was built in record time. For comparison, the Suez Canal, 160 kilometers long, was built in 10 years. The Panama Canal, 80 kilometers long, took 28 years to build. The White Sea Canal, 227 kilometers long, was built in 1 year and 9 months. This was facilitated by the active involvement of prisoners in the construction, which later became the subject of criticism. However, it is worth recognizing that it was precisely Joseph Stalin who brought to life an idea that other rulers of Russia could not realize for 300 years. As soon as Soviet submarines passed through the White Sea Canal into the White Sea, Norway immediately changed its position and stopped poaching in Soviet waters. In total, in the period from 1933 to 1941, with the help of the White Sea Canal, 10 destroyers, 300 patrol ships, and 26 submarines were transferred to the north. All this played an important role in the defense during the Second World War. That is why during the war, the Nazis tried with all their might to destroy the White Sea Canal. After the war, the facilities of the White Sea Canal were restored, and after that, numerous modernizations began. As a result, the White Sea Canal became a single deep-water system of the European part of the Soviet Union. Nowadays, it continues to function at full capacity. At the moment, Russia is reconstructing all the hydraulic structures of the White Sea Canal. Moreover, the Russian military also regularly conducts exercises to transfer the military fleet through this canal. Through this canal, Russia can freely send any of its fleets to the Baltic Sea, depriving NATO countries of the opportunity to observe what is happening. Thus, the White Sea Canal is integral to defending Russia's northern borders, which is especially important in light of NATO's plans for northward expansion. Against this backdrop, State Duma Deputy Yuri Shvitkin confirmed that Russia is preparing to significantly strengthen the Baltic Fleet by transferring dozens of warships to the Gulf of Finland through the White Sea Canal. Russia will never allow the Baltic Sea to become an internal sea of NATO. At the moment, Russia is preparing to strengthen the Baltic Fleet with the help of the latest submarines and new generation warships. Some of these ships and submarines have already been transferred to the Baltic Sea via the White Sea Canal. I urge the NATO countries to come to their senses and stop before it's too late. Otherwise, Russia will have to completely destroy the North Atlantic Alliance with the help of its military force, State Duma Deputy Yuri Shvitkin said. Earlier, Russian ambassador to Belgium Alexander Tokavynin also urged NATO not to make fatal mistakes. According to him, NATO's decision to start patrolling the Baltic Sea will lead to the fact that Russian warships will begin to detain all vessels of NATO countries, including military ones. Of course, all this can lead to the outbreak of a global war. And judging by what is happening in the Baltic Sea right now, Russia is ready for any development of the situation.